Zeus, Aphrodite, Athena and Achilles, the heroes, gods and goddesses of ancient Greece, whose myths and culture gave birth to the whole of Western civilization. But can they be made relevant today? In an effort to interest British students, some schools are trialling a new approach to the ancient classics, and there's even a new version of Homer's Iliad, retold as a love story between two men. Katie Razzle has been finding out what students think.
My favourite character is Poseidon because he's one of the most powerful gods and he's the leader of the seas.
My favourite character is Thetis because she's so strong-willed.
I like Zeus because he's really cunning about how he got Peleus to fall in love with Thetis and how the storyline turns out.
During those years, he became best friends with
At Thurston Community College near Bury St Edmunds, they're hearing the story of the Trojan Wars just as they did millennia ago.
And so his name means no lips.
The war with Troy retold for schools. The story of the goddess Thetis, her son Achilles, a great warrior, half god, half mortal. He of that famous weak spot.
The place where she held him, his heel.
And can we tell which three goddesses they are?
The Year 9 pupils then frozen in scenes from the story for others to guess.
Brilliant. And Athena is the goddess of?
War and battle.
War and wisdom, yeah.
The stories are so rich with descriptive language and also the ideas that have been around, things that happen to people, what people's lives were like. And it's just a chance for them to really kind of explore their imaginations.
At the British Library, they hold the origin of all this, the first printed editions of the Iliad.
Back in 1488, when this came out, there weren't actually very many people who could have read it. But amazingly, less than 20 years later, when this little book was printed, there was a real market for it as more and more educated people wanted to study classical Greek for themselves.
The rage of Achilles. Sing it now, goddess. Sing.
The Iliad tells the story of the Trojan War in 15,000 lines of poetry.
She was taller than I was, taller than any woman I had ever seen.
2,500 years on, this American classicist is bringing it to a new audience.
He will be a god, she said. I did not know what to say, so I said nothing.
Madeline Miller fell in love with the Iliad when her mother read it to her as a tiny girl. Her version is a gay love story between the swift-footed Achilles and his friend Patroclus.
I wanted it to be completely accessible. I didn't want anyone to feel intimidated or made to feel stupid by it in any way. But I also hoped that classicists who picked it up might feel inspired by it, or there are a few little, inside things that they might see.
Ms. Miller isn't the first to see Achilles and Patroclus as homosexuals. Plato did too. Homer's stories, she says, feed her interest in humanity.
Oftentimes these things are taking place on a huge monumental stage. You have gods and you have these warriors and huge epic fights, but within that the insight about humans and human nature, I think, is very subtle.
Ms. Miller may love the myths of the past, but her novel makes her of the moment too. There are 3 new translations of Homer's Iliad coming out, and a retelling of the story in a new poem by Alice Oswald. And never say Hollywood doesn't get in on the act.
If there is one human who could lead them against Hyperion, it would be Theseus.
Immortals, out in November, pits Theseus and the gods of Olympus against a brutal king who wants to destroy them. Mythical characters have often graced our screens, but until recently, teaching the classics was on the wane. There's a real drive to get Latin, the most taught classical language, back into comprehensive schools. For the first time, more state schools are offering it than private ones, like Burlington Danes in London.
They hurried to the exercise area.
Previously a failing comprehensive, now a thriving academy. And the Latin class knows a bit about the Iliad too.
Achilles.
Yeah, I've heard of that story. It's, the strong guy who got beaten because he had a weak spot on his heel.
Helena Troy, one prince loved her and she ran away with him.
These pupils perhaps at the forefront of a new dawn when more schools view the classics as a grounding for the future.